Kelly Oubre, 27 years old, played in 48 games this season, averaged 20 points and 5 rebounds per game. I think offensively, he's relatively limited in what he can do to get his points. He's a stationary spot up shooter and really a streaky one at that. But one thing that I think he's done a better job of, and I've been harping on this the whole podcast this season, is just getting to the rim, changing his shot profile up a little bit. He doubled his drives per game from 3.6 to 7.2 from last season to this one. He averaged a career best 6.7 rim attempts per 75 possessions. And he's also doing this with a little bit more of a pick and roll ball handler duties as well. And the thing that's really limiting in his offensive game when it comes to this, like he's not driving to pass. Like that's just not a part of his game. He's not doing it to set others up. His assist rate just isn't there when he's handling the ball out of the pick and roll or getting to the rim. He's doing it to score. And I feel like that's just part of his mentality. He's a scorer, microwave scorer. And I think sometimes, we think, you talk about this a lot, Lee, we think he's actually shooting better from three than he actually is. And I want to say almost he shot worse this year than last year. I could be wrong.
He did. He did.
Okay. So, but I will still harp on the fact that he at least changed his shot profile up a little bit on the offensive side. And then defensively, there's some good and bad, some give and take here. He still loses focus off the ball for backdoor cuts and things of that nature, but he did a much better job of being a disruptor, getting his hands in passing lanes. He had 3.2 deflections per game, which was top 10 in the NBA. I also thought he was fairly decent on the ball too when it comes to like the steals. And, overall, like when you take a step back, I think probably it's a net neutral on defense if you factor in everything. But to me, with Kelly Oubre, you know what you're getting from him. He's very limited offensively in terms of what you are getting. He is not going to set others up, but at least you can expect this guy to light other teams up for 25, 30 points on occasion if he can get hot. But I think the streakiness of Kelly Oubre was a little bit hard to watch at times. And I'm not sure he'll be back next year.
Yeah, I'm not sure he'll be back either. I am not. I don't dislike Kelly Oubre by any means. I'm just kind of indifferent to him. Like if Kelly Oubre was not retained, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I think Richie, you've done a very fair job this season at kind of carving out parts of his game that he has expanded, and I think it's all very fair and true. I just I just don't think he is, and I hate to use this term because it's charged and it's probably not particularly intelligent, but I just don't think he's like a winning player. You mentioned something I've long kind of beat the drum on. He's kind of billed as a shooter, but actually isn't. Now, his streakiness does change that calculation a little bit because he will hit 7 or 8 threes in a game, once a month, and it can like literally win you a game. He provided us one of the greatest Eric Collins quotes of all time when he hit the deep three in the fourth quarter, and Eric Collins gave us his iconic "From Sardis Road" call. I mean, that's just like, I'll love him for that always.
I think that was against the Pistons.
Yeah, and it was
That was awesome.
it was the Kelly Oubre game. I mean, he was just nuclear, completely unconscious. So yeah, he shot 31% from the three this season. He's never shot over 34% from three on a single season. His career three-point shooting average is 33%. So he is, and like you said, I do think he has improved marginally as a defender. I would still bill him as, like you said, kind of a net neutral or even slightly negative defender. So it again, like, and his net rating on the year, almost 3,000 possessions, negative 8.3. Now that paints it in a slightly unfair light because the Hornets were negative 6.3 as a team. So he's only kind of slightly under what the Hornets team net average was. But again, I guess I'll just wrap up by saying I'm indifferent to Oubre. If they bring him back, I hope it's on a very kind of team friendly, manageable deal. I can't imagine he would command much demand in the market, although there probably are teams out there that could use kind of a spark plug wing that comes off their bench that they don't necessarily need to depend on, but that can give them a random nuclear performance here or there. So he certainly will obviously be employed next season. I'm just not necessarily dying for it to be in a Hornet uniform.
Ben, thoughts on Oubre?
I will say I absolutely love Kelly Oubre. His value on court is still to be determined. I think that, like y'all said, I thought he was infinitely better this year than he was his first season in Charlotte. His first season in Charlotte, he was basically post-injury Clay. If Clay shot 33% from three, and that's not a good basketball player. But this year, it's like he figured out how to use his athleticism. I think Clifford got to him a little bit in that, he's one of, if not the most athletic players on the court at basically all times. And he used that. The efficiency wasn't good, but I will say that if you were watching the games, it didn't necessarily feel like it was that bad. It didn't feel like you were shooting 41%. It felt much better than that. And that probably doesn't mean anything because it was 41%. But defensively, I thought he was better this year. The one thing about Kelly Oubre is it's easy to watch him and say, well, goodness, he's not a very good defender. And he's not an outstanding defender, but he seems to have the toughest assignment, 1 through 3, even 4 sometimes, basically game in and game out. And, you can't expect the guy to be this lockdown defender when you're being asked to guard De'Aaron Fox one night, LeBron the next night, and then Luka the night after that. So I think it's a little unfair to him sometimes. He definitely gets disinterested off ball quite a bit.
Yeah,
that's the issue. He gets back cut quite frequently, and that's very frustrating. But he also, like I said, like you guys said, he's top 10 in the NBA in deflections, and deflections are wonderful. He gets a lot of steals, and offensively, 20 points that's not nothing. And it's not the greatest 20 points you've ever seen, but it's valuable. And do I want him back next year as a starter? No. But on a reasonable deal, having him back, yeah, because it also felt like in the waning days of the season when playoffs were a distant, long memory, he was one of the only people that it felt like cared at times. It felt like he cared, and then PJ, Dennis Smith, those were like the 3 that come to mind initially when we think about who still cared throughout the entire season. And maybe that feels like a little bit of a little league YMCA compliment, but on a team like this in a season like that, I think that's worth at least noting.
No, yeah, that to me is not something that you can dismiss by any means. And I think having players on the roster that have the energy, that have the want to, that have the desire, even with the season the way that it was going, it's very easy to check out and take a back seat and not bring the energy night to night. And I think that's something that Kelly Oubre has always had. Is there a number, guys, that you just wouldn't go? I personally wouldn't bring them back. I feel like there's some other priorities that I would factor in, but is there a number that feels fair, or is there a number that you just would not go above to bring this guy back? He was on a salary of $12 million. Like if the value is 15 million, 16 million, do you bring him back, Lee?
No.
Okay.
I'm with you, Richie. I would, and look, quick thing I will say is I do appreciate that Kelly Oubre has made public comments that he really loves Charlotte. So and he's a fun player. So I do want to put that out there. This is a very sober analysis from me, but there are things to like about Oubre. And he does have one of the best nicknames in the NBA, Tsunami Poppy. So that counts too. But I mean, think about it this way: like Cody Martin's getting $8 million a year, and granted, he had a very disappointing season from an availability standpoint. But I think Cody Martin is a more effective NBA player than Kelly Oubre is, even though Cody Martin's never going to average 20 points a game, certainly. So I would not go above like the $8 million threshold for Kelly Oubre. And to be fair, I think there probably are NBA teams that would go above that threshold
Correct.
in the market. So although I'm admitting that there will be teams that will value him above that line, I wouldn't go there.
What about you, Ben? Now remember, we've got Nick Batum's $9 million coming off this offseason. So there's some extra
Are we throwing a
spending
party
cash
for that?
coming
Are we
in.
doing a podcast on the day that rolls off the books?
We should have a celebration. We'll have a celebration. Yeah.
Yeah, about as far as Kelly Oubre, I don't know. It's kind of hard for a couple of reasons. First being, I'm going to need a minute to get a sense of what the new normal is with the new CBA. So, 10 million last year and the same as 10 million next year. If I think there's something to be said for guys like Kelly Oubre who want to be in Charlotte, because a lot of guys don't want to be in Charlotte, if we're being totally honest with ourselves. So I don't have an exact number in mind, but if I was able to just give him the exact same deal that he played the last 2 years on, I think it'd be hard for me not to do it. If you're asking me at 15 or 16 million, probably not. That's tough. I think he's more valuable to some other team than he is to us, and B, I'm not, as much as I do love Kelly Oubre and I hope wherever he is next year he has success, I'm not willing to get into a bidding war over him when there's bigger needs and he's not necessarily filling a hole.
Yeah, that number that he had this year feels fair, and especially as you're talking about how the numbers are going to go up every year in terms of the cap, it feels more fair. But I still would kind of second guess that, and I'm probably not as low as Lee, like that 8-9 million, but probably somewhere in between there that I would kind of have to second guess myself. But yeah, 16 million, definitely not, but we will see. I said that he exceeded expectations only because the point total that Ben was talking about, yes, he had more of a role this season, but also just changing the profile. What about you, Lee?
I'll go meets expectation. I think he was and still is exactly who I thought he was.
What about you, Ben?
I would go exceeded, if for no other reason, because he is the total anti-Clifford player, and partially out of necessity. Well, not partially, a large part out of necessity. But he seemed like he actually, like he helped. I thought, I thought we were. I don't know if the numbers backs up or not. I thought we were better when he played, and that's not nothing.
Yeah, and that's a good point about Clifford. I think we were talking about Oubre in the preseason pods, Lee, about how Oubre is the one un-Clifford player, and he might be out of the rotation. Now, injuries probably played a role, so we never really got the full picture there, but he did a whole lot better under Clifford than we probably would have given him credit for. Lastly, let's get to DSJ. 25 years old, played in 54 games, averaged 8 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds. Interestingly enough, he was on a Exhibit 9 contract late in the summer, late addition to the team. And he like Oubre, is a free agent this offseason, and he's a guy that I would probably or definitely put over Oubre in terms of the priority list, mainly because of the lack of stability with the Hornets and their backup point guard position. So, Lee, I'll let you start off DSJ here before Ben and I give our thoughts.
Oh yeah, I mean DSJ. Yeah, I mean probably the bright story of the season here. I mean, literally plucked him off the streets. Any team in the NBA could have had him. The kind of like traditional counting stats don't necessarily pop off the page. Besides that 5 to 1.5 assist to turnover ratio, which is incredibly impressive. I mean, for a guy who kind of was long billed as, not necessarily a great decision maker, not much of a distributor, not someone who kind of elevated and created good opportunities for his teammates around him. He had some decent kind of scoring years early in his career as a lottery pick in Dallas, but was never particularly efficient when he did it. So kind of was like an empty calories scorer early in his career until he slowly, a part of the Porzingis trade, ended up in New York and slowly like faded out of the league basically. So for him to come in, play 55 games, 15 starts, and to be a unique presence in the backcourt for the Hornets. Richie, how long on this podcast had we just pleaded for any sort of resistance at point of attack defense, for any sort of resistance from an on-ball kind of head of defense player. And of course, the Hornets find that player, not in the draft, because I long criticized, Kupchak has his feathers in his cap from a utilizing draft capital standpoint, including Nick Richards, who we already talked about. But like, I was just almost irate at certain times by the fact that he just refused to spend draft capital on trying to find a decent backup point guard. And he basically just kicked dirt in my face by finding a guy that wasn't even on NBA teams' radars. So the uniqueness that he added, the point of attack defense, the downhill rim protection, and even kind of the off-ball disruptive defense that he provides too. How many times this season did DSJ, kind of like disrupt opposing teams' offenses' passing lanes, and just like a nuclear athlete around the rim too, and in transition. Now, early in the season when DSJ was having a lot of success, the one thing we pointed out on this podcast numerous times is like, the shooting probably won't hold up. The shooting probably won't hold up. And it didn't. He shot 21% from three on the year, which is essentially a non-shooter. But everything else was sustainable. And that was the one thing we knew that probably wouldn't stick around. So that's okay. Like, if Dennis Smith Jr. could shoot, he'd be a $20 million a year player. So the fact that that is the kind of one big hole in his game, I think makes him retainable. It would certainly be interesting to talk about what kind of contract we think he is in line for and what kind of competition the Hornets may have in retaining him. But the last point I'll make here is he pairs quite nicely with LaMelo Ball. Like, not only as a backup point guard, he's like the inverse of LaMelo in every kind of beautiful way as a backup point guard. But the LaMelo DSJ pairing as backcourt mates actually isn't bad either. Now, it's a fair, not a super small sample size, only 500 possessions, but that's not nothing. A flat net rating for those two as a backcourt pairing on the floor together. And again, you may say flat net rating, not incredibly impressive, but when you put it in the context of the Hornets team net rating was -6, it actually is quite impressive. So for all those reasons, I think he has to be a massive priority for the Hornets this offseason because, again, of those qualities that he provides that just don't exist anywhere else on the roster besides some overlap with Cody Martin. But Cody, again, is your kind of receiver on offense, solid rotational defensive player, whereas DSJ is really like a point of attack bulldog and downhill rim attacker and distributor, which Cody Martin is not. DSJ creates for others and Cody doesn't.
Oh, I think Cody is a little bit of a distributor.
Fair. That's fair.
I think he is too.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right, Lee. Like, I think he was the best individual defender on the Hornets roster. And I'll go real quick here before I pass it off to Ben. I guess if it was like a center or power forward, it's probably out of the question, but he took on the best player, whether it was a guard or a wing. And I think he has the perfect combination of both power and athleticism and just bodying up players, hustling, contesting shots, navigating screens. He even makes weak side blocks every now and then. And I think he just takes pride in those one-on-one matchups. And you saw that on a game-to-game basis. And that power and that athleticism shows up on the offensive end. Yeah, he can't shoot, but he's got to compensate for that in other ways on the court. And I think the best way to do that is to try to get to the rim and use that power, use that strength, and he knows his own strengths, and he did very well in driving and kicking and getting others involved. He was going to get to the rim. He was going to try to draw fouls. He was going to try to kick it out to the corners. He had a very, very solid assist rate off of drives. So, yeah, he does not have the spacing, but playing with LaMelo, as Lee alluded to, is a very good combo because LaMelo doesn't have the rim pressure, but DSJ does. LaMelo doesn't have the point of attack defense, but DSJ does. So I do think that they complement each other more than one would think. A lot of people say, you got to get a shooter around LaMelo where he can drive and kick to them. But you can also use it in this way too. If DSJ gets a little bit better as a cutter, and but even when he has the ball in his hands, making quick decisions and getting into the paint is very good. So Ben, I know we're kind of up against the clock here, but I know you probably have some good thoughts on DSJ.
Yeah, I love DSJ. He was my favorite story of the entire season. And I will be very, very disappointed if he's not back. I don't know what the contract looks like. For all we know, some team may see what we see and shell out a contract that we just can't reasonably meet. So if that happens, that happens. But on the surface, he is, by most metrics and by the eye test, one of the best guard on ball defenders in the league. I mean, it's absurd because he's so strong and athletic that I would not want to be someone trying to score on him. And offensively, like y'all mentioned, no, he absolutely cannot shoot. And he got off to a good start shooting, which means that at the last 40 games of the season for him or something, he probably shot like 15% from three. It was rough to watch, but other than that, offensively, he's a good passer. He's a nuclear athlete, and he helps everyone else. He can play on ball. He can play off ball. He can play off ball a little bit. He's a good cutter. He can receive some passes and finish it. He's a great finisher. And I agree with y'all that I think he can play with LaMelo very, very well. I think that LaMelo's ideal backcourt mate, I would prioritize being a good defender over being a really good shooter, which is why, if we just needed shooting next to LaMelo, then Terry Rozier, we wouldn't even be having that conversation. But Dennis Smith, I think, actually fits next to LaMelo better than Terry Rozier does. When you look at the fact that you can just put Dennis Smith on whoever the best guard on the other team is, and that's that. And then LaMelo can he'll take whoever the other guy is. And so basically, yeah, I love DSJ. I want him back, and the metrics, the numbers, whatever you look at, supports that he was one of the most valuable defenders in the league. And it's not me to say he was the most valuable defender in the league.
I'm going to go ahead and speak for everyone and say that he exceeded expectations for everyone. So we won't get into the grading here, but Ben, thanks so much for